Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be warm, loud, a little messy, the way family holidays usually are. But that night, the air around the table felt tight, like something invisible was pressing down on everyone. My son-in-law, Andrew, leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and asked loud enough for the whole room to hear, "So, Catherine, when are you going to get a real job?" I just smiled at him. Then I said quietly, "Right after I fire you from yours." And suddenly, the entire room stopped breathing. Andrew's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against the plate. For a moment, nobody moved. Not a sip of wine, not the scrape of a chair. The table, packed with roasted turkey, glossy cranberry sauce, and dishes. Nobody suddenly seemed interested in eating, went completely still. Then Andrew laughed. It was sharp, too sharp. The kind of laugh that comes out fast because silence feels dangerous. "Okay, Mom," he said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "Good one." He looked around the table while he said it, searching for allies, for witnesses, for anyone to confirm that what I'd said was a joke. Seriously, he continued, tapping his temple lightly. "For a second there, I thought you were actually having a..." He trailed off just long enough to make the implication land. A senior moment. Jessica let out a nervous giggle that sounded more like a squeak. Her eyes flicked back and forth between us like a spectator at a tennis match. "Mom," she whispered, leaning toward me slightly. "Really, let's not do this today. Just eat your turkey." But my fork stayed on the table, untouched. My attention was entirely on Andrew. In business, there's a kind of silence that happens right before a hostile takeover. I've heard it more times than I can count over 40 years in conference rooms and board meetings. It's heavy. It pulls the oxygen out of the room. This felt exactly the same. Andrew was waiting for me to laugh, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to wave it off and shrink back into the harmless, broke mother-in-law role everyone preferred. I didn't. I just sat there in my simple cotton dress, hands folded calmly in front of me, watching him. You learn something interesting after decades in business. Power isn't loud. Real power rarely needs to be. Only insecurity shouts. Andrew had been shouting for years. The leased luxury car parked out front. The oversized watch that kept snagging on his cuff like it needed attention. The constant bragging about bonuses that hadn't even cleared yet. Noise, all of it. The frantic kind of noise a man makes when he's trying to convince the world and maybe himself that he's valuable. Looking at him now, I didn't see a powerful executive sitting at the head of the table. I saw a distressed asset, a balance sheet bleeding red ink. He shifted in his chair, the leather creaking under him. His smile wavered for just a second before he forced it back into place. That tiny crack told me everything. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, trying to reclaim the center of the room. "Look, Catherine," he said, voice dripping with polite condescension. "I know holidays can be stressful. Maybe you're just tired. But let's not pretend you have any idea what my job actually involves." His eyes swept over me, my dress, my old watch. The absence of brand names anywhere in sight. "You haven't worked in, 20 years, he added. "The business world's changed." I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip, calm, deliberate. Then I set it back down. "Has it?" I asked quietly. Andrew frowned. "Math hasn't changed," I continued. "Profit and loss haven't changed." I tilted my head slightly as I looked at him. And the consequences of incompetence, those definitely haven't changed. The words hung in the air for a second. You could almost hear them settling between the plates and wine glasses. Jessica shifted in her seat. My grandson Austin slowly lowered his phone, the screen going dark for the first time that evening. Andrew stared at me. "Mom," Jessica said finally, her voice tighter now. "You're staring." "I'm not staring," I replied calmly. My voice sounded different, even to me, lower, stripped of the soft, grandmotherly warmth everyone was used to hearing. "I'm evaluating." Andrew blinked. "Evaluating what he asked," leaning back in his chair. "The asset," I said. Then I tilted my head slightly. "And the liability." For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then irritation rushed in to fill the space. He reached for the wine bottle and poured himself another glass, the liquid sloshing against the rim. His hand wasn't steady. Not quite. The bottle tapped lightly against the crystal. Clink. It was subtle, but I noticed. In business, the smallest tremor often tells you more than the loudest speech. A bead of sweat had formed along Andrew's hairline. Just one. It rolled slowly toward his temple. Interesting. Somewhere deep in that reptile brain of his, the one wired to detect threats, before logic catches up, something had started to feel off. He just didn't know what. Andrew set the bottle down a little harder than necessary and straightened in his chair, trying to recover the posture he liked to perform for rooms like this. The executive posture, the alpha at the head of the table posture. He leaned forward slightly, attempting to loom across the table. "Look, Catherine," he said, forcing a thin smile. "I know holidays can get emotional. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Happens." His eyes flicked over my clothes again, my faded cotton dress, the sleeves slightly worn at the cuffs, the old wristwatch with the scratched glass. He couldn't reconcile what he saw with the tone he was hearing. That bothered him. "But let's not pretend," he continued, "that you understand anything about what I do. You haven't worked in, 20 years? He shrugged, spreading his hands as if the conclusion were obvious. "The business world has changed," I listened quietly. "People often assume silence means weakness. In reality, it's usually the opposite. Silence gives you time to observe," and Andrew was becoming very easy to read. His smile stayed on his mouth, but his fingers kept adjusting the cuff of his shirt. The oversized watch slid down his wrist again and again. His foot had started bouncing under the table. Forced confidence. Overcompensation. Classic signs of a position under pressure. I took another slow sip of water before answering. "Has it?" I said. Andrew's brows pulled together. "Math hasn't changed." I continued, setting the glass down carefully. "Profit and loss hasn't changed." My eyes met his. "And the consequences of incompetence certainly haven't changed." The room felt smaller now. Even the air seemed thinner. Austin leaned forward slightly, watching both of us, like someone witnessing a game he suddenly realized had real stakes. Andrew laughed again, but this one sounded hollow. "Oh, please," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Incompetence." He leaned back and spread his arms across the back of his chair, reclaiming the stage. "I'm the one paying for this house this weekend," he said loudly. "I paid for the food on this table." His voice rose a notch as he spoke, like volume alone could stabilize the ground under him. "And I'm definitely not taking business advice from someone whose biggest financial decision this decade was choosing between cat food brands." Jessica looked down at her plate. No one else laughed. Andrew noticed. That's when the second bead of sweat appeared. He wiped it away quickly with his thumb, pretending it hadn't been there. But I'd already seen it. And in my mind, the evaluation was becoming clearer. Not an asset, not even close. What sat across from me at the head of the table was a liability wearing an expensive suit. I checked the time on my old watch. The scratched glass caught the overhead light for a moment. 11:55. 5 minutes. Across the table, Andrew was still talking, still performing for the room like a man who believed volume could turn fiction into fact. But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was thinking about the seat I'd been given, the one at the far end of the table, the spare seat. You know the one. Every family has it. The chair reserved for the least important guest. The one where you have to lean forward just to hear the conversation happening at the center. The place where people assume you'll stay quiet because you're too far away to matter. For years they thought putting me there was a punishment. They thought pushing me to the edge made me small. They were wrong. There's a strategic advantage to sitting at the edge of the table. I learned that a long time ago in boardrooms. When you sit in the center, you're performing. Everyone is watching you, measuring you, judging every word. But when you sit at the edge, you get to watch them. And observation is the most valuable position in any negotiation. For the last decade, that's exactly what I've done. My eyes drifted slowly down the length of the oak table, taking in the familiar details. The rented china, the decorative centerpiece that would be wilted by morning, the wine glasses polished so carefully you could see your reflection in them. Then I looked at Jessica. My daughter sat 2 chairs away, twisting the diamond ring on her finger again and again. It sparkled under the lights, big enough to impress a room. But I knew that ring better than anyone else there. I knew the receipt, 24% interest on a credit card that had never fully recovered. Jessica liked to believe it symbolized stability, success, the life she had built. All I saw was monthly minimum payments. My gaze shifted further down the table. Andrew sat at the head jacket, unbuttoned now, posture, wide like a man occupying territory. The suit was custom. I recognized the tailoring style immediately. The kind executives order when they want to look like they belong in magazines. It probably cost more than my first car. But the suit wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the man inside it. Andrew had built his entire identity on appearances. The luxury lease in the driveway, the oversized watch that flashed whenever he moved his hands, the endless stories about bonuses and promotions and big things coming next quarter, noise, all of it. Because the numbers behind that noise told a very different story. Maxed out credit lines, refinanced loans, a lifestyle balanced on leverage so thin that one real audit could snap it like dry wood. They all looked at me and saw a woman in a 10-year-old cotton dress who drove a vintage Mercedes because she couldn't afford something newer. They saw failure. But from the edge of the table, the view is clearer. From here, you see the cracks in the foundation. You see the stress lines around a man's mouth when he talks about money. You see the tiny hesitation before someone swipes a credit card. You see the panic behind the confidence. There's a letter I've always wanted to write to people who get pushed to the edge of the table in their families. The black sheep, the poor relatives. The ones who never quite fit the brand everyone else is trying to project. It would be a very short letter. Just 1 sentence, really. Don't envy the people in the center. The view is better from here. Because from the edge, you can see exactly which empires are built on bedrock and which ones are balanced on debt. Andrew kept talking, but his voice had faded into the background for me. When you've spent decades around negotiations, you learn when the real conversation has already moved somewhere else. My attention stayed on the table, on the people around it, on the quiet details they assumed I couldn't see. Because the truth is, They had no idea how closely I'd been watching their lives. Andrew certainly didn't know. He didn't know that 4 years ago, when his startup collapsed and the bank started circling the debt, didn't simply disappear the way he liked to tell the story. Someone bought it quietly. An anonymous purchase through a secondary holding company buried under paperwork. So dull no one bothered to look twice. That someone was me. I didn't do it for him. I did it for Jessica. My daughter had already signed her name to more of Andrew's financial adventures than she realized. If that startup had imploded the way it was supposed to, the fallout would have taken her house with it. So I bought the debt, not to forgive it, just to control it. Andrew never asked who the mysterious buyer was. Men like him rarely do. As long as the problem disappears, they assume it solved itself. But that wasn't the only thread I'd been holding. The angel investor group that funded Andrew's next opportunity, the one he bragged about constantly, the one that finally got him his executive title, was another interesting piece of the puzzle. On paper, it looked like a group of independent venture partners. Different names, different addresses. Very impressive. But the shell corporation managing those funds, that was mine. Sunday morning's coffee on the kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing the numbers while the rest of the world slept. Andrew loved telling people how hard he'd worked to attract those investors, how his vision had convinced them to take a chance. I never corrected him. Sometimes it's more useful when people underestimate the safety net beneath their feet. For years, that's exactly what I had been, a silent partner in their lives. The invisible structure keeping the whole fragile arrangement upright. It wasn't charity. It was risk management. I had spent a lifetime building businesses. You don't stop thinking like an investor just because the company is now your family. Jessica had chosen a husband who treated money like a casino chip. That meant someone had to quietly hedge the downside. So I did. A loan purchased here, a strategic investment there, a subtle shift of ownership that prevented certain disasters from ever reaching the surface. They thought I was dependent on them. The poor mother who needed help with groceries. The old woman in the faded dress who drove a car that wasn't shiny enough to impress the neighbors. They thought they were carrying me. The irony is, they had been walking across a safety net I built the entire time, and they spat on it without ever realizing it existed. But every investment has a maturity date. Every silent partner eventually calls for an audit. Across the table, Andrew poured another glass of wine, his movements sharper now, a little less smooth than before. He leaned forward again, trying to reclaim the room. "You're awfully quiet, Catherine," he said, forcing a smirk. "Thinking about your next consulting gig?" A small pause. "Or just wondering how you're going to afford gas to get home?" The table went still again. He wanted the old Catherine now, the one who apologized, the one who laughed off insults and offered to help with the dishes. But the problem Andrew didn't understand yet was simple. I wasn't thinking about gas. I was thinking about the transfer he'd made last Tuesday. $300,000, and the very unfortunate mistake he'd made when he tried to hide it. Andrew leaned back in his chair like the moment belonged to him again. The smirk had returned, thin and sharp around the edges. "You're awfully quiet, Catherine," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "What is it? Thinking about your next consulting gig?" He paused, letting the word consulting drip with sarcasm. "Or just wondering how you're going to afford gas to get home?" No one laughed. Jessica stared down at her plate like the mashed potatoes had suddenly become fascinating. Andrew noticed the silence, but instead of backing off, he leaned into it. "Sometimes people mistake cruelty for strength." Actually, he said, clearing his throat like he was about to make an announcement at a board meeting. "This little outburst kind of clears things up. Jessica stiffened beside him. Andrew, she started softly, but he kept going. Jessica and I have been having some conversations about your living situation, he said, glancing around the table as if he were sharing responsible adult news. The room grew very quiet. We've been looking at the numbers, he continued. And frankly, supporting you just isn't sustainable anymore. Supporting me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Across the table, Austin slowly lowered his fork. His eyes moved from his father to me. Andrew kept talking. Especially with the baby starting private school next year, he added, we can't keep carrying me. The woman who quietly paid off their credit cards in 2019. The woman who secretly covered the shortfall on their mortgage down payment. But of course, they didn't know that. Andrew dabbed his mouth with his napkin, calm and deliberate. So we found a place, he said. Shady Pines or whatever it's called. It's state-funded. Jessica winced. It's safe, Andrew added quickly. Basic, sure. You'll probably have a roommate, but honestly, it's all we can afford for you. Jessica's fingers tightened around her fork. Andrew, she whispered. He ignored her again. We're moving up the timeline, he said. Monday we'll pack up your apartment. You don't really need most of that stuff anyway. The cruelty in his voice wasn't loud. It was worse than that. Practical. Like he was discussing old furniture that needed to be moved to storage. I turned my head slightly and looked at Austin. He was 15, the age when boys usually hide behind their phones and pretend the world doesn't exist outside their screens. But his phone was face down on the table now, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his father. The expression on his face wasn't anger. It was something quieter. Shame. He was seeing Andrew clearly for the first time. Andrew thought he was demonstrating authority, responsibility, control. What Austin saw was a man bullying an old woman at a holiday dinner. Across the table, Andrew carved another piece of turkey like the conversation was finished. You're putting me in a state home, I said evenly. To save money. It's for your own good, Andrew replied immediately. You need supervision. Supervision. The word rolled around the table slowly. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel betrayed. Those emotions belong to families. And as far as I was concerned now, Andrew was no longer family. He was something much simpler, a bad investment. And like every bad investment, eventually it has to be liquidated. I listened to Andrew finish his little speech about Monday, about packing up my apartment, about the state facility he decided would be good enough for me. When he was done, he picked up his fork again like the subject had been settled. Like he just negotiated a deal. Let's just have a nice dinner, okay? He said, cutting into his turkey. No more stories about secret bank accounts. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with my napkin, carefully. Then I folded the linen into a perfect square and placed it beside my plate. It was a small movement, quiet enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. But in the boardroom on the 45th floor of the Chen Global Building, the gesture had a very specific meaning. My board knew it well. It meant the social portion of the meeting was over. No more polite conversation. No more small talk. No more pretending. It meant we were moving into execution. Across the table, Andrew didn't understand the signal. Of course he didn't. He was still chewing, still relaxed in the easy confidence of a man who thought he had already won. You're right, Andrew, I said calmly. He glanced up. We shouldn't talk about secret accounts. I pushed my chair back slightly. Not enough to stand, just enough for the movement to draw attention. We should talk about public ones. The room went still again. Something in my voice had changed. Jessica heard it first. Her head lifted slowly, confusion flickering across her face. The warmth people usually heard when I spoke to them grandmotherly softness. The gentle tone of someone asking if you'd like more pie was gone. In its place was something flatter, colder. The voice I used when I addressed junior executives who had just made a catastrophic mistake. Andrew noticed it too, though he couldn't quite place why the air suddenly felt heavier. He leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain that casual posture he liked so much. "What exactly are you talking about?" he asked, a faint edge creeping into his voice. I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I turned my head and looked down the table. "Austin," I said. My grandson straightened slightly. "Unlock your phone." He blinked. "Open your trading app." Andrew let out a short laugh. "Oh, come on," he said. "Don't drag the kid into whatever this is." But Austin was already reaching for his phone. Kids have better instincts than adults sometimes. They can feel when the weather is about to change. And right then, the storm was just starting to roll in. Austin hesitated for only a second before unlocking his phone. Teenagers move fast when curiosity gets involved. The screen lit up his face as he tapped through his apps. Andrew rolled his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "Oh, come on," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "Catherine, please don't turn this into some kind of performance." But I wasn't looking at him. "Austin," I said calmly, "open your trading app." He nodded, thumb moving across the screen. "Got it." "Good. Now search for a ticker symbol." Andrew snorted into his wine. "This should be good." "Type in CGV," I said. Chen Global Ventures. Andrew actually laughed this time. A loud, amused laugh meant for the room. "Chen Global," he said. "Catherine, that's a multinational holding company. What exactly are you pretending here that you bought a few shares with your social security checks?" I didn't answer him. "Austin," I continued, read the market cap. Austin squinted at his screen as the page loaded. The room was so quiet you could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Then his eyebrows climbed slowly up his forehead. Grandma, yes, it says 4.8. He blinked. 4.8 billion. The words settled over the table like snowfall. Andrew's smile froze. Austin turned the phone slightly, staring harder at the numbers as if expecting them to change. "Scroll down," I said. He obeyed. "Open the news tab." Another pause. Then Austin swallowed. "There's a headline from this morning," he said. Slowly. "Read it." His voice felt smaller now. "Chen Global Ventures completes hostile acquisition of Apex Dynamics." For a split second, nothing happened. Then Andrew's wine glass slipped out of his hand. He hadn't thrown it. His fingers had simply stopped working. The glass hit the edge of his plate and shattered across the table in a burst of crystal and red wine. The liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. "That's a lie," Andrew whispered. His face had gone completely gray. "Apex is being bought by a private equity firm. The board told us." "I am the private equity firm," I said. I folded my hands calmly on the table. "I operate through 3 layers of shell companies because I prefer anonymity." Andrew stared at me like he'd never seen me before. "But make no mistake," I continued, "as of 9 o'clock this morning, I became the majority shareholder of Apex Dynamics." Jessica's fork slipped from her fingers. Andrew's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am also," I added gently, "the chairman of the board." The silence that followed felt enormous. Andrew blinked rapidly, trying to force the world back into the shape he understood. "You're bluffing," he finally said, though his voice sounded thin now. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "No, Andrew." I met his eyes across the table. "I'm the one reviewing your department's performance reports." His breathing became shallow. For years, he had sat at the head of this table, believing he was the most powerful person in the room. Now, he was discovering something very uncomfortable. He'd been reporting to me the entire time, Andrew shot up from his chair so fast it slammed into the wall behind him. "You can't fire me," he snapped, pointing a shaking finger across the table. The confidence was still there, but now it sounded brittle like glass under pressure. "I have a contract." His eyes darted toward Jessica, toward the table, toward anything that might steady him. "I have a golden parachute clause," he continued quickly. "If the company terminates me without cause, you owe me 2 years of salary. Stock options, too." His voice was rising now. "You think you can just walk in here and play God because you bought some shares? I'll sue you for wrongful termination. I'll drag you and your shell companies through court for years." He looked around the table, desperate for witnesses. "Did you hear that?" he demanded. "She's threatening me. This is harassment." I didn't move. "Sit down, Andrew." "No," he shot back immediately. "You don't get to tell me what to do in my own house." His finger was still pointed at me, trembling slightly. "You're bluffing," he said. "You can't touch me without cause." I tilted my head. "I have cause." Andrew laughed again, louder this time, trying to force control back into the room. "Incompetence isn't cause," he said. "I hit my targets. I got my bonus." "Yes," I said calmly. "You did get your bonus." I folded my hands together on the table. $250,000. Andrew's expression hardened. "And you immediately used it as a deposit on a vacation home in Aspen," I added. A bold move for a man with 3 maxed out credit cards. He froze. "How do you—" But I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Here's the problem with that bonus, Andrew." I smoothed a wrinkle in the tablecloth with my fingertips. "You didn't earn it." The words landed like a hammer. Jessica's head snapped up. "What?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen once. "Check your email," I said. Andrew blinked. "What?" "Check your email." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he pulled his phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking now, just enough that he nearly dropped it. The notification pinged as the message loaded. That, I said quietly, is a preliminary report from the forensic accounting team I sent into Apex Dynamics on Monday. Jessica stared at me. "You sent a team?" "They've been reviewing your department's books for the last 72 hours, I continued. Andrew's eyes moved rapidly across the screen. I watched the color drain from his face, line by line. "When we reviewed the third quarter revenue numbers you reported," I said, "we noticed something interesting." Jessica leaned forward, panic creeping into her voice. "Andrew, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "You booked revenue for 3 major contracts that haven't been signed yet," I said. The room felt colder suddenly. "You inflated projections to push the numbers over the threshold. That triggered your performance bonus." Jessica gasped. "Andrew, still nothing." "You collected the bonus," I continued softly, "and hoped you could close the deals before the year-end audit." Andrew finally looked up at me. The confidence was gone now. All that remained was fear. That, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet whisper that carried across the room, is not just bad management. I met his eyes. "That is corporate fraud." I paused. "And under Section 12, Paragraph 4 of your employment contract." The silence stretched tight. "It is grounds for immediate termination." Jessica's fork slid from her hand and hit the plate with a dull clink. I picked up my glass of water. "And Andrew," I added, calmly taking a sip, "it's also grounds for criminal prosecution." Andrew stared at the screen of his phone like it was written in another language. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then his shoulders sank. The fight drained out of him so fast it was almost physical, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere inside his chest. You wouldn't," he said finally. His voice sounded smaller now, fragile. "You wouldn't do this to me." I watched him across the table. I'm family, he added quickly, the word tumbling out like a last defense. Think about that. Family. I repeated the word quietly in my head, almost tasting it. Family, I said aloud, is the people you protect. My eyes moved briefly to Jessica, who was staring at the table through silent tears. You were planning to put me in a state facility to save $4,000 a month, I continued calmly. You were planning to erase me. Andrew's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The king at the head of the table was gone now. In his place sat a man who had just realized the floor beneath him wasn't solid. I'm not filing charges yet, I said. Hope flickered in his eyes. But the SEC tends to take a very dim view of insider trading and revenue manipulation. The hope disappeared. Whether they hear about it, I added, depends entirely on what happens in the next 5 minutes. Andrew looked at the phone in his hand, then at Jessica, then up at the ceiling like maybe some miracle would appear in the plaster. When his eyes came back to me, they were wet. "Mom," he croaked. The words sounded strange coming from him. "Please." He leaned forward, slightly, desperation replacing every ounce of arrogance. "You can't do this. If that report gets out, I'm finished. I'll be blacklisted. No company will touch me." His voice cracked. "Think about the family. Think about your grandchildren. If I lose this job, we lose the house. We lose everything. You lost the house 6 months ago, Andrew," I said, glancing at my watch. "You just haven't admitted it yet." Then I picked up my phone. "Siri," I said calmly, "call Robert." Andrew shot up halfway out of his chair. No, the call connected before he could finish. "Margaret," a voice answered on the other end. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Hello, Robert," I said evenly. Across the table, Andrew froze. "I'm confirming the termination of the Vice President of Operations at Apex Dynamics. Effective immediately." Andrew's hands were shaking now. "Authorization code." I continued 7 Alpha Zulu. A pause. "Understood," Robert replied. "And Robert," I added my tone steady forward, "the forensic audit to the SEC compliance officer." The silence in the room deepened. "Let them decide how to proceed." Another brief pause. "Done," Robert said. I ended the call. Across the table, Andrew collapsed back into his chair. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was ruin. Andrew sat there for a few seconds, breathing hard, staring at the table like the world had tilted sideways. Then the anger came back. Not the confident kind he'd worn earlier. This one was raw, desperate. "You vindictive old." The rest of the word exploded out of him as he jumped to his feet again, chair scraping violently across the floor. "Get out," he shouted, pointing at the door. "Get out of my house right now." Jessica flinched. Andrew's face was red now, his voice echoing off the walls of the lake house. "Take your cheap dress, your old car, and get the hell off my property." I stood slowly. No rush, no anger. I picked up my purse from beside my chair and slipped the strap over my shoulder. "Actually, Andrew," I said calmly. I reached into the side pocket and pulled out a folded document. "It's funny you should mention the property." The paper slid across the table when I tossed it down. It landed beside the dark stain of spilled wine, the edges already curling slightly against the damp cloth. Andrew frowned. "What is this supposed to be? I know you've been renting this place for the holidays," I said, smoothing the front of my dress. "You like the way it looks in photos." His eyes moved down to the document. "But the owner listed it for sale 3 months ago," I continued. "You didn't notice, of course. You don't read the real estate section. You only read articles about yourself." Andrew picked up the paper. Jessica leaned toward him. It took a moment for the meaning to land. The title sat clearly at the top, "Deed of Sale." "I bought it this morning," I said. Andrew's eyes snapped up. "Cash offer. 30-day closing." I paused. But the occupancy rights transferred immediately at noon. The room went completely silent. I glanced around the dining room, slowly, taking in the polished table, the rented plates, the broken glass still glittering under the light. Then I looked back at Andrew. "So technically," I said calmly, "you're not yelling at a guest." His grip tightened on the paper. "You're yelling at your landlord." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And since you just threatened me," I added, my voice steady, "I'm invoking the immediate eviction clause for tenant misconduct." I picked up my purse again. "You have 1 hour to vacate the property." The silence that followed felt enormous, like a kingdom collapsing without making a sound. The front door closed with a quiet final click. For a moment, no one moved. Catherine stepped onto the porch and paused, the cool air brushing against her face. Inside the house, the tension still lingered like a storm that had finally passed, but left the sky heavy and gray. Behind her, footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor. And Catherine, wait, she turned. Austin stood in the doorway, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes flicked back toward the living room, where the muffled voices of the others still carried through the house. Then he looked at her again, steadier this time. "I'm coming with you." Catherine studied his face for a long moment. Not defiance, not anger, just quiet certainty. "You don't have to do that," she said gently. "I know," Austin replied, "but I want to." For the first time that evening, something warm softened Catherine's expression. She nodded once. "All right." Behind Austin, Jessica appeared in the hallway. She didn't step outside. She simply stood there, arms folded tightly as if holding herself together. "Catherine," she called. Catherine turned back toward the door. Jessica's voice was controlled, but the distance between them felt wider than the length of the hallway. "You said something about the house." Catherine walked a few steps closer to the doorway, but didn't cross the threshold. "Yes," she said calmly. "It's already been handled." Jessica frowned slightly. "Handled how?" "The property was transferred this afternoon," Catherine explained. "It's been placed into a trust." Jessica blinked. "A trust? For Austin?" The words hung in the air. Jessica's expression shifted. Surprise, confusion, something more complicated underneath. "It won't belong to me," Catherine continued quietly. "And it won't belong to anyone who treats it like a weapon. The trust ensures it stays protected." Jessica's mouth opened slightly, but whatever she was about to say seemed to lose its shape before it reached her lips. For a brief moment, mother and daughter Yinteple looked at each other. Years of misunderstandings, disappointments, and silence stretched between them like an invisible wall. "I see," Jessica finally said. Her voice was softer now, but the distance remained. Catherine nodded once. No argument, no explanation, just acceptance. Then she turned away. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she walked down the driveway. At the curb waited her old Mercedes, its silver paint dulled by time but still dependable. Austin climbed into the passenger seat while Catherine settled behind the wheel. The engine turned over with a familiar hum. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Through the windshield, the house stood quiet behind them, large, still, and suddenly feeling much farther away than the length of the driveway. Austin glanced at her. "Are you okay?" Catherine looked at the road ahead, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. "Yes," she said after a moment, and for the first time that night, it was the truth. Sometimes protecting what matters means walking away from what doesn't. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It's quiet decisions made at the right moment. Catherine shifted the car into drive. The Mercedes rolled forward, headlights cutting softly through the darkening street, leaving the house and everything tied to it, slowly behind. Beside her, Austin watched the road ahead, and Catherine drove on, lighter than she had been in years, knowing that some ties are meant to be cut, so the ones that truly matter can finally breathe. Catherine didn't slam the door or raise her voice. She just started the engine and drove away, leaving behind a house full of noise and a life that no longer deserved her silence. Sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting louder, it's knowing when to walk away from people who mistake your patience for weakness. Toxic family dynamics can cut deep, but quiet strength can cut ties just as clean. If you've ever faced something like this, share your story in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, stick around, there are more like it here.